wasn't going to do one of these videos when Shawn Michaels retired, after he gave his retirement speech on Raw after WrestleMania. A lot of people put up videos, tributes, thanking him, what the thoughts were on Shawn Michaels, that sort of thing. And as a lot of people have noted since I've been on here, I'm not one to do a lot of talking about tributes and talking about guys' careers, or even talking about guys pass away like Canyon. It's just not something that I like doing for various reasons. And a lot of it has to just do with the way I look at things, and the way I look at things are not the same way a lot of other people look at things, and I don't want to offend anybody, and I don't want to upset anyone, so usually I just kind of keep my mouth shut about such things, and those sorts of things. But DeMarco did kind of a thank you to Shawn Michaels, or kind of his thoughts on Shawn Michaels from a pro wrestler's point of view, particularly a guy who got in the business because of Shawn Michaels. So I thought I would come on here and kind of give my thoughts after some debate about Shawn Michaels, because my views are probably a bit different than a lot of other people's. And after seeing his speech, his goodbye speech on Raw, it had a different effect on me than I think it did on a lot of other people for various reasons. And I would imagine I'm not the only one, but I'm probably one of the few people on here that had kind of the reaction that I had. So I thought I would come on here and just give you my thoughts on Shawn Michaels and his career, and kind of how it's affected me as a wrestling fan, particularly a diehard wrestling fan, someone that has been a diehard wrestling fan for a very long time. First time I ever saw Shawn Michaels was in the AWA as the Midnight Rockers. I can remember the first time I saw the team and was kind of like, oh, so they couldn't get the Midnight Express, they couldn't get the Rock and Roll Express, so they just they put these two young guys and came up with the Midnight Rockers. And, just thought, as I'm sure, as I know a lot of other people did, even though Jannetty and Shawn Michaels both hate it when people always say this, that they were nothing more than a rip-off of the Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express, more of the Rock and Roll Express. And they were good, but they weren't anything that I particularly ever went on my way to see, and so be it. Then they eventually showed up in WWF, and when they first started off, again, it just seemed like, well, this is the WWF's version of the Rocker, or the Rock and Roll Express, and so be it. And really, at the time, they weren't, when they were brought in, you had a lot of good tag teams, you had a lot of over tag teams in the WWF, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And then as time went on, I did become a fan of theirs. As anyone that's watched a lot of my videos knows, I'm a big fan of tag team wrestling. I like tag team wrestling a lot. And while I never considered them on the same level as the Rock and Roll and Midnight Express, who I put on a very high pedestal, because they are, without a doubt, the two teams that made me fall in love with tag team wrestling. I still enjoyed them, and I enjoyed them a lot. And so, when the angle happened, and when the team finally broke up, and you had the barbershop segment, and Shawn Michaels super kicked Marty Jannetty through the glass, which was set up very well, and was a long, kind of drawn out type of thing, and was fairly shocking at the time. And Shawn Michaels went on his way, and Marty Jannetty went on his way. It was, I remember that. I remember thinking, okay, where's this going to go? Then he, got with Sensational Sherry, and his career kind of just started skyrocketing. I can remember thinking, he was good, he was this, and then I think really, like most people, even though I thought he was pretty good, it was the ladder match that just, I think, made me go, wow. It's hard to explain to people who aren't old enough to know, but to those of us that didn't know, we really didn't know what to expect with the first ladder match with Shawn. Well, not the first, but the ladder match between the first ladder match between Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels. We really didn't know what to expect. And what we got was pretty jaw-dropping. Wouldn't be the last time we would see something like this, but it was fairly jaw-dropping. And it set the standard, and I think that was when everyone went, wow, this guy is, wow. I mean, really, that was a match that made two guys' careers. It made Scott Hall's. It made Shawn Michaels. And, yeah, I can just remember thinking, oh my God, that was pretty amazing. And went on from there, and then, of course, we get to the next, I guess you would say, highlight, where you get him beating Bret Hart for the title in the Iron Man match. As a lot of people know, I'm not a big fan of that match. I'm not a big believer in that match, per se. I think it's a great match, but I think it is an overrated match, in my opinion. However, it is kind of an interesting match, because at that point, I think, is when people really started with the, was Shawn worth it? And that's something that a lot of people today probably don't understand. At the time, Shawn Michaels was paying the ass for the WWE, paying the ass for Bret Hart. You heard him talk about it in his goodbye speech, and I'll talk about that later. But as someone that was on the internet, as someone that, did follow kind of the backstage stuff and wound up following the backstage stuff, it was fairly evident that Shawn Michaels was, I think if you would call him a cancer in the WWE or WWF, I don't think that's an understatement. He was a huge problem at the time, and which is, you had the injuries, you had him refusing to job certain guys, you had all the stuff that has been talked about for years and years and years, and when he finally got the title, a debate started, which was, particularly since a lot of that stuff continued, there was still a lot of, for all the crap that Shawn Michaels put the WWF through, was he worth it? Which always came around to him going to the main event, him putting on an amazing main event, and everyone going, well, maybe he is worth it. Because the trump card and all that was always, wow, this may be this generation's Ric Flair. He's so good. Maybe he is the next Ric Flair. Maybe he's going to be the guy that is going to take that torch and be what Ric Flair was. So perhaps he was worth it. And that continued, and it went on, and that was always a debate. It was always a debate of, and every time that would get heated, Shawn Michaels seemed to, understand it got heated, and then would go out and put on, another amazing match. And it is odd that his last match, in my opinion, was with The Undertaker, because really, in part, one of the biggest, most heated moments of all of that was right about the time of the first Hell in the Cell, which, again, we didn't know what to expect. They both went out there, was amazing, set the standard. Even with the screwy job finish that most people don't even remember that it had a screwy job finish and was still this lauded match, that it was like, maybe he is worth it. Probably when it became a point of even, I would say, after Montreal, people thought, okay, now Bret's gone, maybe things will settle down, maybe things will make sense. And of course, we were getting close to the coronation, if you will, of Austin. Of course, before that, Shawn Michaels killed his back, murdered his back would probably be a better term. In which a lot of us wondered, first, was the injury legit because of all the stuff that had happened before, and second, was he going to show up? Was this just him not wanting to do the job to Austin, this, that, and the other? And as time went on, it became apparent that the injury was legit. A lot of people wondered how the match was even going to go on because there was people were like, Shawn doesn't even look like he can walk. And Shawn Michaels walked out there. A lot of people knew this may be his last match and said, screw it, I'm going to go out the way I want to go out. And with one of the most messed up backs you could probably imagine, put on the best match he probably could. And for those of us that understood how much pain and how messed up his back was, literally that could have been his swan song, and people could have said, maybe his last match wasn't his best, but those of us that kind of understood what was going on would have been, but goddamn, that may have been one of the best performances of his career because of all the circumstances surrounding it. And he did the right thing, and gave Austin kind of the torch, went off, could have been his swan song, and that was it. And then the debate became what could have been. Could he have been the next Ric Flair? Because honestly, we thought he was done. We thought that he was never coming back. And it was like, what could have been, imagine all, it was a lot of what ifs with Shawn Michaels until he came back. And of course, during the time he was gone, he got married. He found religion. He got apparently his life cleaned up, and a lot of us wondered. We were very skeptical because it was Shawn Michaels, and how much of this was, Shawn Michaels. I mean, how much of it was legit? Had he really changed? Was anything really any different? And when he came back, a lot of us thought, okay, well, this will just be a way for Shawn Michaels to finally say goodbye the way he wants to say goodbye and go out on a high note. Little did we know that that would not be the case, and that he would bring up that debate again of just how good is Shawn Michaels? Where does he rate among the very best? All the matches he had at WrestleMania, all the matches he had, all of the great matches he had after he came back, all of the amazing matches he had when he came back with, a messed up back and bad knees and, being gone for so long and all of those sorts of things. And it's very odd that he was the guy to give Ric Flair the send-off that probably Ric Flair deserved. Because I think when it's all said and done, Shawn Michaels, his, in my opinion, his legacy, and some people will think that this is me kind of, downplaying him, but really it's not. This is a big deal to me. As good as Shawn Michaels was, as great as Shawn Michaels was, the fact that you had pretty much 2 generations of pro wrestling fans that got to witness Shawn Michaels in his amazingness, realized that Ric Flair was that much better. And the fact that you can say that, and the fact that fans have kind of a gauge of saying, look how good Shawn Michaels was. When Ric Flair was in his prime, he was that much better. And so in a lot of ways, that is his legacy. That is, in my opinion, his biggest legacy, because he wasn't always the biggest draw. He was the best wrestler, but he wasn't the guy that, intertwined in the fabric of pro wrestling. He wasn't Hulk Hogan. He wasn't Ric Flair. And I think the thing that his greatest gift to Ric Flair isn't that last match, or his retirement match, which wasn't his retirement match, but anyways, was the fact that he gave us a gauge of just how great Ric Flair really was. And to me, that's his ultimate achievement. And even with all the other matches and all the other things, I think the thing that amazed me after watching, being there live, seeing his last match, knowing that was his last match, and thinking, wow, that's what popped into my mind is that a generation, maybe 2 generations, got to see a guy that was so good that still wasn't Ric Flair, and has a gauge to just how great Ric Flair really was. And on top of that, when Shawn left and he came back, a lot of people wondered how much he had changed. A lot of people had wondered, everyone knew that he had found religion. Everyone knew that he had said he found peace with himself. And that's always a skeptical thing, because you always wonder how true that is. And to me, when he gave that final goodbye speech and he basically said that everything Bret Hart ever said about him was probably true. Everything that, every time that, every bad thing that Vince McMahon ever offhandedly ever said about him was probably true. That he, that he wasn't the best of employees, that he did drive everybody crazy, that he wasn't the best of guys. And the fact that you could tell he was saying this and he understood that, what, yes, I wasn't the best of I did some bad things, and that ultimately I understand that just because you ask someone for forgiveness or just because you say, I am sorry, doesn't mean that you're not going to pay for those bad things later. And that's what I got from his speech when he finally said his goodbyes. And to me, that is an interesting thing, because ultimately what I saw was not, forget all of the stuff that happened in the ring, forget all the stuff that happened kind of outside of the ring, but much like his DVD, My Journey, you saw a journey. You saw a guy go through from pretty much a kid, from a young guy to a full-fledged adult. And you saw him mature, you saw him change, you saw him have that defining moment in his life. And at the very end, you saw a guy that looked like he was truly at peace with himself. And that, to me, is something that very few people get to see. And very few people, even when you're the people that you know for all of your life, you seldom get to see that. And so, to me, that's what I'm going to remember. More than the matches, more than anything else, that's what I'm going to remember, because I remember the stuff from before. I remember the debates on, was he worth it? And I think the thing about it is, when you finally get to the end and you finally get to the whole thing, yeah, he was worth it. When it all was all said and done, he had to go through a lot to get to that point. But I think every fan from the 90s that always asked, was Shawn Michaels worth it? I think when it finally was done, I think the thing that he can take away from it is, I think a lot of us would say, well, you know what? You were worth it, Shawn. So with that, thank you and goodbye.